Finding $1 million property that brings in tens of thousands of dollars of gross income on a monthly basis is pretty doable. There's quite a few of those out there. However, what if you could buy a $200,000 property that, after all the expenses are calculated on both the $1 million and the $200,000 property, you're actually making the same amount or more of net cash flow. That's the amount that you're actually sticking in your pocket after all your expenses on the $200,000 property than on the $1 million property. This is also very doable, but most people don't understand how this could be the case, what type of property to target, and all the factors that play into creating this type of net cash flow. So in this video, I'm going to explain how you can make a $200,000 property create the same net cash flow as a $1 million property. I've been obsessed with this equation for a while now of lowest cash outlay, lowest investment possible, to highest recurring income possible. And in most cases, typically, the more money you invest, the higher you can expect in terms of recurring income. However, there's these pockets within real estate investing, and specifically within the short-term rental industry, where you can find really affordable properties that create a much higher than normal recurring monthly income. So when you think about the $1 million property that brings in $10,000 per month on average, obviously only so many people can afford that type of property. And it's appealing, most of these properties are beautiful properties, but then once you start to calculate in the expenses required to operate a short-term rental of that cost, typically those expenses are pretty high. Once you start to factor in a mortgage at today's interest rates, the cleaning costs on typically these are larger properties, the cost of amenities that you have to provide because the nightly rate that you're charging, most guests are going to have very high expectations around furnishings, around amenities, around the experience that you provide. So once you start to factor in all of these costs, the net cash flow that's left over can sometimes be pretty small. So you might have a property that is a beautiful property and it might appreciate over time, but it's not paying you on a monthly basis very well. If you compare that $1 million property to a $200,000 property that do exist all throughout the Midwest and Southeast, you can still buy properties that cheaply, and you start to calculate the expenses on operating a $200,000 property, obviously the mortgage is much smaller. The taxes are going to be lower. Most likely the cleaning costs are going to be lower. The expectations of the guest are not going to be nearly as high, so there probably won't be as many refunds. You're not going to need to provide as many amenities. So the cost to operate that property is much, much lower. However, the percentage that the nightly rate drops off does not coincide with the percentage that the price drops off. So $1 million to $200,000, obviously you're buying it for 20% of the $1 million property. The $200,000 property is 20% of the $1 million property. But the nightly rate doesn't drop to 20% if you pick the right areas. So typically we target areas just outside of larger cities throughout the Midwest and Southeast. So within an hour drive of a larger city, so to where you still have some population. And then we target areas that have local draws. So this could be anything like a traveling sports facility. It could be a museum, a water park. We have Lake Michigan near ours. There's wineries, there's a casino, there's the Bourbon Trail where there's really affordable towns just outside of Louisville. And you've got these distilleries that are drawing people to that area, but yet you can pick up a property really cheaply. So in these pockets, in these types of areas, you'll find that the nightly rate compared to an area with $1 million property might only decrease 20% or 30% or even 40%, but you're buying the property for 20% of the purchase price. So your return on investment for this type of property is so much higher because the income reduction from the $1 million property isn't super dramatic, but your expense reduction is. So if you think about it, your return on investment on a $200,000 property where your expenses are much, much lower, but the nightly rate is only reduced about 40%, the ROI per dollar invested is substantially higher than the $1 million property. If you want to increase this even further, what we typically do is we target multi-unit properties. So a property that is a single family house with an ADU in the back, or a finished basement, or a finished garage, or even a tree house. These types of properties now produce multiple streams of income coming in. You can have a super listing where both units are listed together. So when large groups travel, they can book both units, and then you can list each individual unit by itself, and you can create income from 2 separate units. Some of the benefits that come with owning these lower cost, higher net cash flow producing properties is that number one, financing is easier to get because you're borrowing a lot less money. And then also a lot of these properties work really well as long-term rentals as well. They'll still cash flow. So you've got this backup strategy. So the bank or the financial institution might underwrite the property as a long-term rental and see, okay, it still works as a long-term rental, even though they're going to use it as a short-term rental and make a lot more cash flow, but they're in a really secured position that this $200,000 property would work as a long-term rental compared to the $1 million property that would have a lot of negative cash flow as a long-term rental, most likely. The second big benefit is that competition is so much lower where these properties are much more affordable. So if you look in the mainstream short-term rental markets like the Smoky Mountains or beachfront locations, what you'll see is that the competition level is super high. And in a lot of cases, you have to just outdo the others to try to attract this small pool of travelers that can afford these really high-end vacations. And so it's a constant one-up to try to get your place booked out with this pool of travelers. In these more affordable locations, people don't travel just for luxury vacations. They book your place for any number of reasons. Any reason why somebody would travel in general, they would book your place over a hotel, all things being equal, because you've got multiple bedrooms, you've got a kitchen, and it's much more comfortable stay. So what you typically see in these lower cost markets is that the bar is much, much lower when it comes to competition. So it's a lot easier to be the absolute best listing in that market and be the first one to get booked. So just over 2.5 years ago, after I was able to leave my full-time job from the income from implementing this strategy, I started working with other people to help them do the exact same thing and be able to create significant cash flow with this sort of unique, utilitarian, low-cost, short-term rental model. So if you're interested in learning how to find the right market for this strategy, how to identify the right types of properties, what financing to use, how to set up your property so that it cash flows the highest humanly possible, and then how to set up your management systems. So again, you can make as much money as possible without spending all your time managing these properties, then you can set up a call with me and we can talk about it. You can go to livingoffrentals.com/call, and that'll take you to a form that you can fill out with a few questions, and then you'll get access to my calendar. And you can book a Zoom call with me and we can talk through your goals and see if the program might be a good fit. If this video was helpful to you, please hit that thumbs up, like button at the bottom of the video. God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.